Welcome to Conscious Conversations, a place where East meets West, a place where conversations and ideas will challenge your minds, expand your consciousness, awaken your heart, and make you think more deeply about yourself and the world.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Conscious Conversations. I'm Anthony Profeta, back again to have another conversation with my dear friend, Wes Gordon. How are you doing today, Wes?
Very well. I feel like I've been here before.
Perfect way to start this. Well, we first want to begin by saying thank you to all of you who did enjoy last week's talk on this possible spiritual prison planet we're living on. We got some really nice feedback, comments about the idea and this whole contemplation of it. And from that, we touched upon something very briefly in the talk and brought up something, this idea of reincarnation. And a few of you reached out to say, can we expand upon that, or can we dedicate a show to talking about this idea? And so we decided that we'd continue this conversation today on reincarnation. Now, this reincarnation is the belief in the continuation of life. And it's a very ancient idea. It's been around for probably as long as people have been on this planet. But yet, according to one specific study, only about 25 to 44% of people actually do believe in the possibility of reincarnation. However, and it does vary from country to country, depending on the belief system of that country and the people that live there. But also, it is a very central tenet or idea and foundation of many of the Eastern philosophies, religions, and faith. This idea of reincarnation is totally counterculture to a very popular phrase and slogan or anagram within the younger generation of today. They have this word YOLO, YOLO, which is an acronym for you only live once. Now, reincarnation would say that, no, that's not the case at all. Actually, you live over and over and over and over again, at least in a body, until you break out of the reincarnation cycle of birth, death, and rebirth and unite yourself once again to the source of all things, whether you call that universal consciousness, God, spirit, great spirit, Buddha nature, or pure mind or clear light mind, or whatever that term is to you. But what is interesting is that, I said 25 to about 44% believe in it. But if the rest of the people, they believe in something different. They believe that we're born and then we are on this journey to death. And there is a large percentage of people that say after death, that's it. It's like our light goes out. And if that's the case, we're just this little blip, an infinite little speck of dust on this span of time, if you will. If we're blessed to live, 80 years, that little 80 years in the continuation of time is irrelevant. Others say that we are born and then life goes on continually through an afterlife where we live an eternity after death. But I find that is a little bit of science says that that's not really the case. Now, I try to back up spiritual topics with a little bit of the science behind it. And science actually says that we are something known as energy. Albert Einstein said all life is a vibration, but he also said through E equals MC squared that all matter, including our bodies, the stuff in this earth, is not true reality. The true reality is that all matter is energy. And the number one law of science is that energy cannot be created, cannot be destroyed. All it could simply do is transition from one state to another. And then, therefore, science would say that those of us that are in body right now had to transition from somewhere prior to our birth because that energy couldn't have been created at birth. And it says when the body gets old and worn out, that we don't die, we don't end. The energy would just transition somewhere else, according to that law of energetics. So, according to science, maybe they could confirm in some ways this idea of reincarnation, that there was something before we incarnated and then we transitioned back to that something after death, and maybe that comes back again and again and again. But what is your take on this idea of reincarnation, Wes?
I didn't realize how vast it was when I started researching it. And then, it goes back to Socrates and Plato.
Oh, yeah.
And then the Romans.
Yes.
And then the Middle Eastern religions, not all of them believe in it.
Correct.
And then they have different versions of how they interpret it. And as you were talking just then, a question just popped into my mind of, we were talking about we're energy. So how does consciousness and energy play together? Does energy have a consciousness, or does it need it? So, when you make that statement, my mind is going, okay, I've never actually put that together. Like, well, does it or doesn't it?
Right.
And
that's a deep conversation, because there are many different beliefs on consciousness itself. There are some schools of thought that it actually originates with the brain, but there's others that say no, absolutely not, because people can be brain dead or have these out-of-body experiences and recognize things that, seeing their body float up in the hospital and seeing doctors work on them.
Right.
So consciousness has to be like outside of the brain. And in my estimation, I believe that consciousness and energy are sort of inherently connected with each other, and that all forms of energy have different levels of consciousness. So a plant has one level of consciousness. Humans have a different level of consciousness. And I believe that consciousness and energy are actually connected in a way.
Okay. As far as with reincarnation, it's a very interesting concept.
Yes.
And, I believe we're evolving as a species, as a race. And I think our ultimate goal is to be, ascend into our spiritual true being.
Nature, yes.
So this may play into the equation somehow. But in my mind, Christ said you need to be born again.
Right.
I'm not sure how that interacts with afterlife or reincarnation. But, right now in the moment,
right,
is what we're supposed to be focused on.
Yes.
At least that's what I've been told. This is the only moment God is. God is this minute, second.
Yes, I agree.
So if you go back into the past and start living your life based on some supposed past life thing, I think you're getting stuck in like a mental, it's like a mental soup of, it's not going to really get you where you need to go.
Right.
I mean, it's entertaining.
Yes.
But how do you feel about that?
I believe you're bringing up an excellent point. In fact, some of the counter, debates about reincarnation is the fact that, well, why don't we remember these past life experiences if they are there, if they are real? And then some say, yes, it's always there in your subconscious soul mind. The memories are always there. But one of the main reasons they say we don't remember them is because if we remembered them, we wouldn't be present to the moment. We'd be stuck in the past of, oh my God, I did this in a past life. Oh my God, that happened to me. Or I was this person. And then in our present moment experience, it could be totally ruined by the memory of that life. Let's say maybe we found out that in a past life we had killed or murdered a bunch of people.
Right.
In this life, we might be going through it with such guilt and shame and remorse. Or let's say the flip side of that. Let's say we remembered that we were Julius Caesar in a past life and did all these things and created an empire. And now in this life, we're just working our way slowly up a corporate ladder. We could become so discouraged of, wow, I did so much. I was so powerful. I had all this in the past. And now here I am just measly working my way up.
Yeah.
And so I do believe that one of the counterpoints of not remembering past lives is so that we can stay present to the moment is a powerful point that you bring up. But it does go back, like you said, many different ages and traditions. Many people believe that it is only within the Eastern traditions that reincarnation is found. And while it was there, you brought up quite the point that it was in Western culture also. The ancient Greeks did believe it. Plato was one of the really first to bring this and run with this idea and say how adamant him and Socrates, his teacher, were about it. In fact, if you go back and read Phaedo from Plato, he quotes Socrates on his deathbed, and Socrates says that I am confident in the belief that there truly is a such thing as living again. He says, and that the living spring from the dead, and that the souls of the dead are in existence now, and that the good souls have a better portion in life than the evil souls. So Socrates does talk about reincarnation before he dies, and his adamant belief that life is continual. And if you go back and read Plato even more, and you read the Republic, he talks about reincarnation further. He talks about, especially in the myth of And if you go back and read that part of it, you'll learn more about Plato's belief on reincarnation. He also says that there's this transitory world in between where the soul goes to, waiting until it can be reborn into a body again.
Wow.
So what reincarnation means, it's a Latin word, and carn, C-A-R-N, is like carnal, or if you want to think of chili con carne, that carne means meat or flesh, and re means again, and in means to enter. So reincarnation means to enter flesh or enter a meat suit.
Literally.
Like, literally.
Right.
Again.
Yeah.
And so that's what reincarnation is. But even like you said, Pythagoras, the great mathematician and also a Greek philosopher, he said the same thing, that the human soul can migrate into one body over and over again. But he brings up the point, which is why I went to the Greeks, that when it incarnates, it loses the memory of its past lives. And he also said because it would become too overwhelming for the person to remember what happened in those sort of experiences. But I think we need to take a short break here, and we'll return and continue this conversation when we come back after these messages. Welcome back to Conscious Conversations. We're here and talking about the topic of reincarnation today, and this idea in many traditions that we come back over and over and over again. And we were talking a little bit before the break about the Greeks, but one other Western ideology that I want to bring up is the Jews and the Christians. Because many say, well, what about the Bible? Does it say anything about reincarnation at all? We did touch about a couple of verses in last week's show, but in a study in 2016, 25% of Christians actually do believe in the idea of reincarnation. And yes, there are some verses that it said can talk or can be said to talk about reincarnation. And also, there are many scholars and historians who believe that ancient and early Jews and Christians did believe in this idea. Now, Orthodox Jews, they usually don't subscribe to it at all. But the more mystical, the Kabbalistic and the Hasidim, the Hasidic Jews, they do embrace the idea of reincarnation. But if you look in the Old Testament, the prophet Micah, referencing, and this is considered a messianic prophecy in which he's talking about the coming of the Messiah, it says, "But you, Bethlehem Ephratah, out of you shall come forth from me one whose going forths are from old." And that's the Micah talking about the Messiah coming out of Bethlehem. And it says after that, his going forth shall be from old. And that many say that that is a old soul that is coming back to this earth again as the Messiah. And in the New Testament of John, there's a part where the Jews, the Jewish priests and the Pharisees and the Sadducees go to John the Baptist, and they ask him who he is. And why is he preaching out here in the desert? And they said, "Who are you? Are you the Christ?" And he says, "No." But then they ask him, "Are you Elijah?" So they're asking him if he's the reincarnation of the prophet Elijah. And in Mark 6, when after John the Baptist is beheaded and Jesus starts performing more miracles and becomes more widely known now because he's out preaching and all these miracles are happening, King Herod hears of him. And King Herod states and is quoted in Mark's gospel. Mark writes that in chapter 6, verse 14 and 15, Herod says, "This is John the Baptist resurrected again." Right. So he thinks Jesus has come back again now as John the Baptist. But others, the next sentence says, but others say, no, he is Elijah. Speaking of Jesus. So now they again think Jesus is reincarnated as Elijah. But Herod said, no, he's John the Baptist. That's how these powers are in him. And even Jesus, when he asks his disciples, "Who do you say I am?" The disciples respond, "You are Elijah." And then another disciple says, "No, you're Jeremiah or one of the prophets." And that's when Peter says, "No, you are the Christ." But prior to Peter's exclamation, his disciples outright say that he's another prophet of the past who has been reincarnated again in this body. And then there are references where Jesus, speaking of Elijah, references him. I'm speaking of John the Baptist, actually references him as Elijah. So in Matthew 11, he says, "Behold, I tell you, for those who have ears, John is Elijah." And then in Matthew 17, Jesus replies that, "I tell you, Elijah has already come, but they did not recognize him and did to him what they will." And his disciples recognize that he's speaking of John the Baptist in that statement. And then in John 9, Jesus and his disciples meet a blind man in the street, and they say to Jesus outright, they ask him a question: who sinned that this man be born blind? Did he sin or his parents sin? Now, stating that he was born blind means that he had to sin in his past, if they asked, did he sin, in order to be born that way. So it had to be, so there is reference that they believed in the reincarnation of the soul. And there is a reference in Revelations in which it says, he who shall overcome shall be made a pillar in the temple of my God and shall go out no more. And some say that those who overcome this earth and themselves and the ego are made a pillar in heaven and need not go out or be reincarnated again because they've evolved to that level. So those are just some things in the Bible that can be stated as reincarnation. But anything that else you want to share?
Yeah, well, my take on this reincarnation, past life regression, afterlife is it's very mentally stimulating, and I feel like you can become drunk on it.
Yes.
And you can become so enthralled with it, it becomes like a religion, and it keeps you stuck.
Yeah.
Because you're constantly focusing on something that really doesn't matter. If you really tune in in the moment, through meditation and prayer, you will be shown the doors and the ways that you need to shift and change to become more evolved as a spiritual being. Now, here's a personal note on my inner self. If there is such a thing as reincarnation, I don't think it's like the way it's played up here, at least for me.
Right.
I mean, Christ said you need to be born again, and I know that experience exists, and you are changed internally. Something happens, you see the world totally different. But I would say that if we are coming back because we didn't make the grade, we missed the mark, we kept sinning, missing the mark.
Correct.
We keep coming back. I think you have what we call spiritual amnesia. In the sense, I think you're building up a spiritual card of wisdom and consciousness that is with you each reincarnation or each birth again, but you can't access that until you actually surrender and open up those doors. And then those things are revealed to you. And some people just instantly know certain things. And you're like, how did they get so far down the road? It's like, I knew them, a few years ago, and they were like totally lost. And all of a sudden, woof. Yeah. It seems like, they've got this instant God encyclopedia going on. I think that may be how the evolution of spiritual consciousness may work.
Right.
But after reading all of this, we don't really know.
No, and that's a good point, because there's many different ideas about reincarnation and the rebirth cycle and all of this and how it works. And some say it's like this, and others say it's like that. Some say there's this idea of transmigration of a soul, in which you're not reborn into a human body again, but can be reborn into an animal or a fish or an insect, depending on things that have been done. So I agree with you. I also do firmly agree with you that if we get too caught up in the past, we can become stuck and miss the moment and miss this life and what life is presenting to us in order for our growth and development, and then be missing that mark by being too living in the past rather than being with what's happening right here and now. But I also believe that the idea of reincarnation actually does affirm, from my point of view, an unconditionally loving and unconditionally merciful and an always forgiving God. Because if we have the ability to continue to come back, to get things right, to make things right, to set things right, and we're not condemned to an eternal hell forever for existence, well, by default, I believe that shows a loving, a merciful, and a forgiving God. Because Jesus himself, when asked how many times we should forgive, his response was, we should forgive 70 times 7 times. Now that really means infinity. We should forever forgive. And if he's asking us to do that, why wouldn't God do that? So if we do something wrong in this lifetime, is it merciful? Is it forgiving to condemn that person to eternal damnation for the rest of their existence? I don't believe so. But I believe that if we do something wrong and then he says, all right, you didn't get it right this time. You know what? I'll give you another go around. Round and round you go until you get it right and evolve yourself back up to that level of consciousness, that level of spirit, that level of existence. I say that the wheel of reincarnation does support an idea of a belief in a loving, merciful, and forgiving God.
I would totally align with that, because the way Christ always was saying, go and sin no more, lest something worse come upon you. I think man has turned man's version of God is the punishing, controlling.
Right.
I don't think that's how God's energy is at all.
No.
And I don't think there's brownie points. You don't get away with anything. Each act carries its own energy and weight in it. So to think just because you're coming back in another lifetime, somehow you escaped something, that's total foolishness, because you haven't.
Right.
Everything comes back and forth to you. So.
Yes. Yeah, and if you didn't meet it now, you'll meet something later, you know,
Right.
so there's no escaping it in this idea of reincarnation. But if any of you are looking to learn more about reincarnation, I highly suggest you study the work of Dr. Ian Stevenson, who was working for 50 years in the University of Virginia Medical School. He's written extensive books on this because he was working with children that would have spontaneous memory recall. Up until about the age of 5 or 7, he said by the time 7 came around, the children would forget it. But when they would be able to talk, they wouldn't relate to the name they were being called. They would say, that's not my name, this is my name, or they'd say that you're not my real family.
Right.
And it was very interesting how these little children and young children would have recollections of things that he could go back and actually find out
Right.
through research.
Right.
And so if you want to learn more about that, I highly recommend you look into them, because there are some fascinating past life recalls by children, and even some that are prevalent today. I mean, in 1998, there was a young boy named James Leninger, in which he actually recalled the life of a World War II pilot. And his
Right.
parents were getting like really freaked out by this, but he would know all things about
Yep.
planes, and he would know all this stuff. Like they were at a toy store, and the mother said, "Oh, look, that plane has a bomb on it." And he said, "No, that's not a bomb. That's a WAP tank or DWAP tank." And they're like, "What is that?" And they had to look. That was an extra fuel tank. So he knew things that like he shouldn't be knowing
know.
at that time, and it was really fascinating. He even was brought to a World War II memorial and recognized people there by name, calling out one of them by name, and told stories that he couldn't have known unless he was actually this James Thurton that he was said he was. But very interesting stuff. So thank you all. I truly appreciate you listening to the conversation, tuning in today. Let us know what you think about reincarnation, maybe who you were in the past, if you have recall of that, and really what your thoughts on this whole topic and idea are. Do you believe in it? Do you not believe in it? And we look forward to talking to you again and conversing more. Next week, we'll see where this takes us. Thank you, Wes. And please leave your comments below. And if you're not connected on social media, join us there. Thank you. Goodbye.